this one, you can screenshot, capture this, right? So these are things that can be done. And so what I was just talking about was the nutrients, right? The vitamins and the minerals that are necessary to regulate hormone production. So this is why it's so important. One of the things, ladies, you know, if you're at this age, if you don't take a high quality multivitamin, it's one of the best things that you can do to supplement your diet so that you're getting more of these nutrients, not necessarily high therapeutic levels, but just regular consistent levels, because most of the food today, even if you're buying organic from the grocery store, it has lower nutrient content than it did 30 years ago. There's soil depletion, and there's all various ways and reasons why our nutrient levels within our foods, again, even organic foods, are lower. And this is why one of the top recommendations I can give you is a solid multi-vitamin mineral formula. I've seen a good multi do wonders for a woman's hot flashes, for a woman's night sweats. So this is kind of top of the list of just a general recommendation. And look, the thing is here, you don't need to do testing. You don't have to go into the doctor and measure all these different hormones. It's very safe to take a multivitamin, and the outcomes can be very, very, very positive. So again, these nutrients are very critical, and a good multi is going to have calcium, magnesium, zinc, and then these different vitamins, A, D, E, K, and the B vitamins. So you can also take these nutrients separately. You can also ask, if you've got a good doctor, you can ask your doctor to test your levels. And again, this is when you're asking for testing the levels, you want to ask for intracellular levels, not serum levels. A lot of doctors want to check serum levels of these nutrients because they don't know anything about nutrition, but serum levels are highly inaccurate to measure. Intracellular levels are what you really want to ask your doctor for in terms of testing. And this allows you, again, to get a good idea. Maybe a multivitamin is the right idea for you, but maybe you need more magnesium. Maybe you're super low in zinc, right? And so taking additional amounts of those might have tremendous benefits for you as well. So again, testing. Testing is where if you want to start mega dosing or getting higher doses of some of these things, then testing can help really differentiate that. Other research studies have shown omega-3 fats, that women lower in omega-3 fat. As a matter of fact, that study I was just showing you, that woman's cohort study, that was one of the findings in that particular research study was that very thing, is that a high intake of oily fish associated with delayed onset of natural menopause by almost 3.5 years. Proportion per day. So 3.5 years is pretty substantial. I mean, imagine if you're 57, but you have a high intake of oily fish, you can expand your onset of menopause potentially into your 60s, right? That's powerful, and that's nutrition. It's what most doctors underestimate and disrespect because they don't understand it, and it's unfortunate that happens. Let's make some room. I want to talk a little bit more about one of the primary patterns. So this right here, you want to take notes, because this is one of the hallmark patterns that I see in women that experience menopausal symptoms. It's because they have an underlying or undisclosed source of inflammation, specifically chronic inflammation. And again, chronic inflammation could come from something like gluten exposure. So if you're not gluten grain-free, this could be the culprit of what's driving this inflammation process that I'm about to describe to you. But other things can also cause this inflammatory process. Sugar is one that in particular we know can drive inflammation. We know that pesticide exposure, other chemicals in the diet, any kind of food allergies. Sometimes we'll see environmental poisons, being a driver of inflammation. One common one is mold exposure. It's like environmental mold exposure. Like these are just examples. This is not an all-inclusive list of all the things that could be a chronic source of underlying inflammation. But point being, anything that's driving chronic inflammation will create a hormonal pattern shift. And that first hormone that changes, or one of them, is cortisol. So chronic inflammation, your body's natural response to chronic inflammation is it's going to produce more cortisol. Okay, why is that important to understand? Well, cortisol is catabolic, right? So if we think about what happens with what does that mean? Catabolic means to break things down. So what does it break down? What does cortisol break down? Well, one of the things it breaks down are your muscles. Remember, one of the symptoms I showed you earlier of menopause was you can't keep lean body mass on. This is one of the reasons why, is that cortisol elevation strips your muscle away. We also know catabolic to bones. And so again, one of the symptoms, early symptoms, is early onset of bone loss. And so cortisol does both of these things, right? Now, heightened cortisol, not regular quantities of cortisol released, but elevated heightened levels of cortisol over time due to chronic inflammation. This is what happens. Now, the other thing that cortisol does is it elevates blood sugar. That's why people that take steroids, understand what are steroids. You know, somebody taking prednisone or cortisone, like these drugs are artificial synthetic forms of cortisol. And what are the side effects of these drugs? Osteoporosis, muscle loss, and diabetes, right? So the longer you're on them, and a lot of people take corticosteroids for diseases like asthma or chronic pain or chronic arthritis, chronic inflammatory disease. Doctors just dispense this stuff on a regular basis. And so again, you know, some doctors that understand, hey, these are problems associated with it, will monitor you and will check up with you and make sure they don't just put you on those drugs forever. But again, if you've got a chronic inflammatory behavior driving this, it's not a drug. It's your behavior that's driving this process. Again, it leads to a heightened blood sugar, which increases insulin. And as you increase insulin over time, this leads to a resistance. And insulin resistance over time feeds back, causing high blood sugar. And high blood sugar, what does that do to your hormones? Well, study after study has shown that women that struggle with high blood sugar issues have worsening hormone abnormalities. You know, in earlier ages, one of the hormone diseases associated with this is PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is just a fancy way of saying diabetes of the ovaries, right? That's what PCOS is. It's diabetes of the ovaries. That's why when women get the diagnosis, they're generally treated with diabetic drugs like metformin to regulate the blood sugar. Again, that's the goal of a drug like metformin. So this type of problem can early onset, but it's not just worsening hormones in terms of PCOS, also in terms of, you know, if you're older, ladies, if you're older, you know, again, it can generate menopausal symptoms, especially elevated blood sugar. I've seen very commonly induce night sweats, induce hot flashes, induce low libido, induce severe mood swings and irritability and erratic behavior, right? So it's these blood sugar swings, again, caused by inflammation, because it's the cortisol that's driving this pathway and driving this problem. And remember that high levels of cortisol also cause vitamin and mineral deficiencies. And so if we go back and we look at, you know, what does cortisol cause? Cortisol can deplete calcium. It can deplete magnesium. Cortisol depletes zinc. Cortisol also depletes vitamin C, which vitamin C is important for progesterone production. So again, you've got a chronic source of inflammation coming from your behavior, leading to a hormonal change that drops or that rises your blood sugar over time, leading to hormonal changes that affect your nutritional status. And now here you are in the situation where not only are you symptomatic, maybe with menopause, maybe with pseudomenopause, depending on your age, or maybe your menopause symptoms are only there not because you're going through menopause, but because you're nutritionally deficient because of the behaviors that you have, because of the diet that you're following. And so again, this is why so many women who discover nutrition and have really good doctor that can measure it, that are going through, you know, very aggressive menopausal symptoms, if they would just get their nutrition checked and just get the right nutrients in their diet, a lot of times the symptoms will completely go away. And in some cases, they don't completely go away. In some cases, though, they dramatically reduce to a level where life and quality of life is improved. And that's, whether they go away or whether we can improve quality of life, both of those are victories, both of those are wins. And so hopefully that's helpful for you. Let's talk about now, again, coming back to this, right? It'll make a little bit better sense now as to why a gluten grain-free diet is so beneficial. One of the reasons why is if you're gluten sensitive, this is one of those drivers of inflammation. Now, lavender's on here because a lot of women going through menopause symptoms have difficulty with sleep. And one of the reasons there's sleep difficulty is you wake up and you're soaked, right? So it's not that you can't fall asleep or go to sleep, although some women do have higher anxiety and have a hard time falling asleep. This is where lavender can be very helpful. As an oil, you can put a little lavender on your pillow. You can spray a little lavender oil on your sheets. And some people take lavender actually oily with a carrier oil, and that you can do too. But lavender can help kind of induce calm. So if you're struggling with anxiety as a major symptom, lavender can be helpful. Now, if you're waking up soaked, lavender's not going to do much to help you go to sleep. Lavender's not going to correct that problem. So if your sleep disruption is occurring as a result of the hot flashes right here, then you need to really gravitate toward these two things right here. Chaste Tree, also known as Vitex agnus castus, and an herb called black cohosh. These two here have hormone regulatory properties. They're actually forms of adaptogens. So if you have, when women do naturally go through menopause, their natural sex steroids will start to drop. They'll start to naturally decline. Well, what these two do is they are adaptogens. So they'll engage with your natural receptors, your natural hormone receptors, and so it can diminish greatly your experience of menopausal symptoms if you're having them aggressively. And these have been well studied, very well researched. There's a lot of clinical trials that have gone on with these two herbals, finding them to be dramatically beneficial for many women going through that change. So black cohosh and chaste tree, otherwise known as Vitex agnus castus, both can be very, very beneficial. Another one is DIM. DIM is a nutrient that can help your body properly metabolize estrogen. And one of the reasons why so many women have aggressive menopause symptoms is there is an estrogen dominance that's occurring. And it's not an estrogen dominance because they're making too much estrogen. It's an estrogen dominance as their natural estrogen production is declining. They're being exposed to artificial estrogens from their choices and behaviors. Where do we get exposure to artificial estrogens? One of the places is in plastics. And you'll see, there's a lot in the marketing of plastic water bottles, for example. They're now marketing them as BPA free. Now that doesn't mean that it's good for you. Plastics in general are not good for you, and just because a plastic doesn't have BPA doesn't mean it doesn't have other chemical phthalates in it that are also mimicking estrogen. Remember, phthalates in plastics are synthetic chemical estrogens that can drive up your body into an estrogen dominant scenario that can mimic menopause. So you want to avoid eating out of plastics, eating off of plastics, heating food up in plastics, storing food in plastics, drinking out of plastics. Any cosmetics that have phthalates in them, you want to read your ingredients and get rid of those, because that's what can drive this artificial estrogen dominance. So again, plastics. What else can drive this? Pesticides. Specifically, there are a number of different forms of pesticides. One of the more common ones is called atrazine, but they're used in modern farming today, and they mimic estrogen. As a matter of fact, where we dump atrazine, where a lot of farms dump atrazine, there's a place, Washington, the Potomac River, where atrazine is dumped. The frogs, the fish, and the salamander actually are being chemically castrated. The males are turning into females because of the level of estrogen mimicry from the pesticides. What do you think that's going to do if it gets into your water? What do you think it's going to do if you're eating foods that aren't organic and you're being exposed to these pesticides on a regular basis, right? It's, again, estrogen dominance. It's why so many women today are struggling with aggressive symptoms versus in the past, versus years in the past. So again, you want to minimize your risk of exposure by avoiding plastics and avoiding pesticides. Well, two easy ways to do that: eat organically and don't eat off of or drink out of plastics. Use glass or ceramic or some other type of material that's non-plastic based. Okay, and that's where DIM can be helpful. So if you're being exposed to high quantities of artificial estrogens, DIM will help your body metabolize and get rid of them. So will calcium D-glucarate. Both of these things help your body process estrogens and move them out through your urine. So that's why these two are on the list. It's for those of you who have this high level of estrogen dominance as a result of your choices and behaviors. Again, you can change your choices and behaviors, and then you can help your body metabolize these things out and do, in essence, do a hormone detox, right? And then I mentioned earlier, the minerals and the vitamins, and we talked about, a good quality multivitamin as being an important aspect of that, but also omega-3. I showed you research on omega-3 reducing problems, but also expanding the fertility range of a woman, right? So by an average of almost 3.5 years, just by getting in adequate quantities of omega-3 fats. So these are things that can be done. So I just say this, that I know a lot of women struggle greatly with the symptoms of menopause, and they just don't have this knowledge. In my experience, women that struggle greatly, the right nutrition takes away so much grief and so much pain and struggle, and it's such a simple thing to do. So do it. Now that you understand it, now that you've learned it, apply it. That's the best message I can send you home with. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below, and as always, thanks for tuning in.